Hey folks, so this is the introduction to the course, which is itself an introduction to LGBT studies. Welcome. So Dr. G here, many of you have had me before, and I'm kind of stoked that you are taking my class again. But if you're new, welcome. So Intro to LGBT Studies is sort of the gateway course into the LGBT Studies minor. BTW, if you are on the regional campus and you want to minor in LGBT studies, just let me know. And if you are on the main campus and you want to do that minor, just drop me a note and I will introduce you to the person on the Kent campus who will hook you up with that. So anyway, this is an introduction to, it's sort of a gateway course to the minor, but it's also just like a fun course. So because it's an introductory course, we're really just going to be focusing on introducing you to some of the foundational concepts that can be applied in other courses, and also just to kind of give you a sort of, I don't want to say brief or shallow, but by which I mean surface level, but because that's not true. But we are going to be examining the various communities that are that often fall under the LGBT umbrella. Also, though many Intro to LGBT Studies courses do not have themes, I decided 3 days before the semester that I was going to give us a theme. And so our theme, which is just going to be a vehicle for exploring the stuff that we're reading, is contemporary, indie, LGBTQIA plus musicians, of which I can now confidently say there are so many, and I am so excited to talk about them with you. So yeah, we're going to be doing a lot of like listening to stuff on Spotify, creating playlists, doing all sorts of cool vibing. All right, so that's just sort of the gist of the class. And the learning outcomes are basically that you're going to understand some basic like foundational concepts, understand some foundational theories that you can apply to not only other courses, but also other primary texts, and just kind of have a more critical awareness of how LGBTQIA communities get talked about or represented, and understanding that things are a bit more complex than are often talked about, right? So there's that. In terms of required course materials, you don't have a course text. Everything that we are doing is going to be linked to you for free on Google Drive. You will need a Slack account. I mentioned that in my introductory email, but you'll need that. You can click on the invite. The invite's everywhere. I want to make sure you get that invite. But you also need a Spotify account. You can do a free account. It's totally fine if you don't mind listening to like the commercials. I will say that like the student monthly fee is like $5 a month. And so it might not be a bad idea because you can you don't have ads, and you can like decide which things you want to like skip or whatever. And I think that it opens up other things that you can play that you might not necessarily be able to. Anyway, so just something to think about. So yeah. What else? You might need headphones. Yeah, because music, right? So another thing to know about this class is that we are not having this class on Zoom. We are doing this class hanging out, like logging into Google Docs, checking what we're doing, and then hanging out with each other on Slack. So the way that we're able to do that is that this is sort of, I hate using this phrase, it's a flipped classroom. But what that means is that I have already in advance, and will throughout the semester, curate these educational experiences that are going to help you engage with the reading, and often in super experimental ways, right? But because of that, or I should say, and because of that, because this is a flipped classroom that is basically every day you're going to be doing something related to this course, or every day that we're meeting, that is, in class, you'll take on an active role. There are no major assignments in this course, which means that like every day is like a new day, right? So it's like there are 28 times that we're meeting during the semester, and I only have 2 requirements: that you are genuinely like completing the homework and that you're doing your best, whatever that best means for you in this moment, in this pandemic moment, during in-class activities. And I promise you that you are going to learn just as much, if not more, from doing these hands-on in-class activities than you would if I tested you on an exam or made you do some term paper that you probably like did like 24 hours before it's due. And that's no shade. Like, I do that shit too. I got deadlines. So, but all this to say, that's actually not how learning happens. So, and there's a way that you can learn really cool stuff without me deciding to test you by having you have the right answer or be correct. It's absurd. That's not how this works, especially not in queer and trans studies. What? So anyway, this is just sort of the grade policy there, but no one fails the course. That's just the short of it, right? There's like a sliding scale, right? In terms of stuff, but in general, people do end up getting higher grades, but that's because they're genuinely participating in the class. And I'm freeing them up to do that by not stressing them out with other stuff that doesn't actually matter. Do know that like, just make sure you're genuinely like, interacting with each other. There are only 7 of us, so just make sure that you kind of switch things up so that you're not interacting with the same people. You're probably going to end up developing some sort of like closeness to your peers just because there are so few of us. There's a lot of fun, awesome bonding that happens. And so you probably won't leave anyone out, but just kind of be cognizant of that you're sort of switching things up in terms of how you're interacting with people. Okay. So there's that. And just be cool, right? Like, yeah. So there are all these different ways to contact me, but the easiest way, I mean, obviously I'm going to be there with you. If you're in the Google Doc, I'm in Google Doc. If you're in Slack, I'm in Slack. I'm always in Slack, right? But you can contact me on Slack, but you can also text me if something feels really important that you kind of need to get me like ASAP. I mean, generally, anyway, just you can text me if that's your jam. There are all these different ways you can contact me. I will say that Slack almost makes email not necessary because there's a place where you can direct message me in Slack, and it's just like you get a response so much faster because I have so many emails that like if you message me on Slack, it's like boop, you're jumped at the front of the line because no professor wants to check their email. I'm just saying. And it's not because of students. Like, trust me, I wish that my emails were from students. No one tells you about email. Anyway, so some people like email in higher ed. I'm not one of those people. Slack is lovely because it gets rid of that. All right. So there's that. Office hours are listed on the schedule there. So there's that. Now, I'm not going to read these like lengthy disclaimers, but I do want to say this. Like, there are a couple of assumptions that I run up against in classes. One is that like LGBT studies courses are easy by virtue of someone being queer, trans, or ace, or intersex. It's just like, oh, I have this identity, therefore this is going to be easy. Or I'm an ally, therefore this is going to be an easy class. But like, and I get that. Like, I understand. And I think part of that is because we live in a fundamentally racist, ableist, transphobic, homophobic world in terms of how it's organized, and that follows into the curriculum. And so when we have these very few spaces to discuss communities that we feel kinships to, I think we get into that sort of trap where it's like, oh, this is going to be easy. But it's because we should be having all of these other interactions. This shouldn't be one of the first times that we're dealing with LGBT stuff throughout our curriculum, and yet we are. So all this to say, like, if we back up for a second, we'd be like, oh no, like LGBT studies is a discipline, like an academic discipline, and there are people who have like PhDs in it. So we would want it to be just as rigorous as like history or sociology or math, right? Or physics. Makes sense, right? We would want that because this is like intellectual world building and theory building that we are doing as LGBTQIA people and scholars and public intellectuals, right? So just be like, yeah, if there are things that are hard, be like, yeah, this is hard, but that's because we're awesome, right? So there's a way to kind of interact with that, but also know that I'm holding space and I understand the frustration of like wanting a space that it just feels easy and seamless. And then you're like, oh shit, no, this is like an academic class, right? Now that being said, this class is a bit more chill than that, but still just sort of know that. The other thing is just that there's another assumption that I get that sometimes folks encounter, which is like that if you're in an LGBT studies class, that your biases won't be challenged, right? But like we all have complex social locations, by which I mean our positionalities in terms of race, class, gender, and disability, nation, religion, all of these things, gender identity, size, body size, age. So all this to say, like, I want you to kind of like recognize that there might be things that we read and you're like, oh shit, like I'm like defensive. What I want to say to you is like, don't like shame yourself for feeling that, but also just kind of like, instead of being like, oh, this is bullshit, just be like, you know what, let this percolate. So like, what if you're encountering something that is like challenging? All I'm saying is just let that percolate, ask yourself questions about like, why am I feeling this way right now? And then just let it be there, right? That's all we're asking here, right? So just sort of keep that in mind. I will say that because this course is, we're in this like forever ever pandemic situation where I think we are all at a moment in which we're like, being like, is this the bottom? Is this the bottom of my grief and exhaustion, right? I want you to know that like I've created this course to hold space for the ways that we might be feeling right now. And so just sort of know that I am intentionally creating a course that is engaging, but is also gentle and holding space for like the whole of your humanity. And I hope that you can feel that in the course that I'm creating. And I also hope that you know that you can come to me if you know, about course stuff or just about anything else that like, I understand how few queer and trans, especially trans mentors there are in higher ed and also at our institution, unfortunately. I'm the only out trans tenure stream faculty. It's neat. It's not neat, actually. It kind of sucks. But my point is, like, I understand that feeling keenly understand that feeling of isolation. And what I'm trying to tell you is that, like, just know that, like, my sort of mentorship to you does not just sort of begin and end at 2:30 to 4 p.m. every class, right? So you can count on me to be a faculty mentor. So that's probably more long and rambly than you wanted, but this is the overview to the course, and I hope you enjoy it, and I hope you enjoy me geeking out and creating this thing around indie LGBTQIA musicians. So let's have a good semester. All right, take care.